So I hope you can stick around. We'll now have a discussion with the filmmaker Haile Gerima and Brenda Stevenson. Haile Gerima is an independent filmmaker and professor emeritus of film at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Born and raised in Ethiopia, Gerima emigrated to the United States in 1967. Following in the footsteps of his father, a dramatist and playwright, Gerima studied acting in Chicago before entering the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television, where his exposure to Latin American films inspired him to mine his own cultural legacy. After completing his thesis film, Bush Mama, in 1975, and by the way, we've played that twice here at the Hammer since I started working here, Gerima received international acclaim with Harvest 3,000 Years, an Ethiopian drama that won the grand prize at the Locarno Film Festival in 1976. After the award-winning film Ashes and Embers and the documentaries Wilmington 10, USA 10,000, and After Winter, Sterling Brown, Gerima filmed his epic film Sankofa in 1993. The film was ignored by U.S. distributors, but Gerima tapped into African American communities and booked sold-out screenings in independent theaters around the country. In 1996, he founded the Sankofa Video and Bookstore in Washington, D.C., a cultural and intellectual space that offers opportunities for self-expression, interaction, discussion, and analysis through community events such as film screenings, book signings, scholar forums, and artist showcases. Gerima continues to distribute and promote his own films, including his most recent film, Teza, which won the Venice Film Festival Jury Prize and the Best Screenplay Award in 2008. He also lectures and conducts workshops in alternative screenwriting and directing, both within the U.S. and internationally. Dr. Brenda Stevenson is an internationally recognized scholar of race, slavery, gender, family, and racial conflict. She's the Nickel Family Endowed Chair and Professor of History and African American Studies at UCLA. Her most significant books include Life in Black and White, Family and Community in the Slave South, The Journals of Charlotte Fortin Grimke, The Contested Murder of Latasha Harlins, Justice, Gender, and the Origins of the LA Riots, and What is Slavery? Stevenson was senior editor of the the Encyclopedia of Black Women's History and co-author of The Underground Railroad. She's a recipient of the Organization of American History Raleigh Prize for the Best Book on Race, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History Woodson Medallion, the Southern Historical Society Blassingame Award, the Ida B. Wells Award from the Women's E-News Organization, and the Gold Shield Award from UCLA. Professor Stevenson is a past fellow of the American Academy in Berlin, the National Humanities Center, the Center for Advanced Studies in the Behavioral Sciences, the American Association of University Women, and the Andrew Mellon Foundation. She's currently the William Andrews Clark Professor at the Center for 17th and 18th Century Studies, and she's just now completing a book on the Black enslaved family. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Haile Gerima and Brenda Stevenson.
Good evening, and thank you all for staying, seeing this magnificent film, and joining in the conversation with this brilliant, incredible writer and director and editor, and so much more, Professor Gerima. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And welcome back to UCLA.
Thank you again.
I teach African American history at UCLA, and every year in every class that I teach on slavery, this is the film that I show. Okay?
Thank you.
This is the film that I show. And I've written about lots of film and criticized film and all that for NPR and other outlets abroad and here. And this film always is the one, no matter what comes out. All right. As far as I've studied the lives of our ancestors for decades, and there's so many incredible stories that you capture and expose in this film. So what I'd like to do is begin by asking you, where do these stories come from? for you?
Well, thank you. Actually, I should say to you that I came to America colonized by, I would say, the American Empire. I had Hollywood movies in the town I grew up. I had Peace Corps teachers. In fact, I was the first generation. I was part of the first Ethiopian generations who had American teachers into a school in a school system designed by the British after the Italian occupation. And so I think that should give you that I was mentally completely destabilized when I came to America. And in short, it's the African American community from day one that challenged me to salvage me from my own. And so some people read Frantz Fanon to decolonize. For me, the African American community salvaged me to really find my own mission, my own purpose, reconstructing my own identity.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So these stories, then, you began to study on your own and discover for yourself this history?
Well, I would say racism, I was not a scholarship student. I was completely a renegade student coming to America from a country that usually needs students who studied agriculture, science, medicine, etc. I was very awkward even when I was at UCLA. I didn't fit well with the Ethiopian scholarship generation that studied for a mission.
Right.
Mine was what is theater going to do for Ethiopia?
Yeah.
And so from the outset, there's this dislocation. And then I had to work as, in the summer, especially in the outskirts of Illinois, I used to have summer job for foreigners where you would come to fix the incoming summer furnitures for white people. And I would say, I think the suburban white American women literally initiated me to confront racism because they were my immediate bosses when I went to work in the summer in this suburban Illinois. And the racism I was getting in a time I am different from black people in America. I'm Ethiopian, I'm not Negro, because at that time that's the situation. And so they initiated me to really go towards identifying myself, even in the beginning, as for my own survival with the black community that didn't negate me. And so, in short, race becomes a factor. And then the stereotype depiction of black people in films, especially in literature, but then also in history, that they never fought back. They were always freed by. I find, and now I can articulate it, that black people were indebted to being freed by somebody else, never having their own agency.
Right.
So that level of confrontation with history began to manifest in the films I made, which I would say is really more about exploring the resistance history of black people in America.
Great. Well, you mentioned the white women whom you came in contact with, and the film does not have white women in it that we see at any rate. There's a mention of the mistress, but we don't see her. One of the amazing things about the film are the roles that you have for the women, okay? The characterization of the variety of women that you would have found in this community the community itself is so diverse too, and so you capture that. And of course, that is the reality of slave community. When we look at it, people are coming from all different places, and some people are born in this situation. Some people are brought into it. Some people are transshipped from Jamaica, from the Caribbean to the U.S. Some people end up going back. Some people go back and forth, etc. So it's incredible that you capture that and the different kinds of culture that are there too. But I want you to talk to me a little bit about the women, how you decided that these would be, they're incredible characterizations of different kinds of enslaved women. And where does that come from, and what were you trying to do with that?
Well, you know, I never wanted to be politically correct. I never have a community to please. Even within my relationship with the African American community is unconditional, critical relationship. I don't paternalize. I don't try to mystify.
Or romanticize.
Yeah. So
Right.
basically, that's where I come from. You know, basically, and then I don't have the stereotype of gender allocation. Who did what? For me, it's normal. Even when I did Bush Mama or Child of Resistance, it didn't occur to me until the audience start putting their trips on me in terms of gender.
Right.
For me, it's normal. I come from a country that, in fact, I'm doing a documentary now on the Italian occupation. I've been doing it for 20 years now. And it's about the occupation. And Ethiopian women were equally fighting with men.
Right.
And that's the women I know.
Cool.
And my teachers, when I was early in 8th, 7th, my father fought guerrilla warfare. His guerrilla fight friends were women also. So it's normal for me. But there's a dichotomy in America. It starts to permeate into a very negative direction, and I don't usually join it. I do the movie, and then I take the audience criticism to learn to be better filmmaker. But there are certain things that, for example, I was confronted, by dogmatic women perspective of why do you show nudity? And then you have demented black men saying to me in the editing room when they came to see me, couldn't you get a better ass woman than this woman you have? So this sexual affixation people were bringing into my perspective was unhealthy.
Right.
Outside that, it's, basically these are just normal things for me to do. There was something you said earlier. I forgot it.
Okay, that's okay. One of the amazing things about the film that I really truly love is you talk a lot about resistance. You show a lot of resistance and different forms of resistance. But I am intrigued and writing myself about marronage. Okay, and marronage is so important in this film. And I know you're making a film on marronage, a documentary. So can you tell us about marronage in this film, this kind of dream, this reality, but nonetheless, this is what keeping the people going is knowing that one day they will be part of this free community where, as one of the characters says, where we can act like normal people, and that's a reality for them in the film, but also a reality in enslaved life. So can you talk a little bit about marronage in this film and the various aspects of it, and then what you're doing with your new film?
Well, I think the most successful work white supremacy has done to black people is taking their self-agency of anything. It could be about writing, it could be about rebellion. It's always somebody else, not black people.
Right.
There's this idea that nurtured the whole society, black people never did these things. And so when I came up with this film and I was financially unable to go to the the mountain type to really do some scenes.
Right.
Economically, I was unable to do that. But even for the little attempted, I found professors, historians denying, like for example, is it in Jamaica? And for me, if you go to Louisiana, fundamentally, it's Senegambian Congo culture you find in Louisiana through also the Haitian connection. So there was not a static, it's a fluid. You go to South Carolina, a whole lot of Caribbean in and out is there.
Right.
And there was deportation of rebellion people also. So basically, the idea of, for me, I was embroiled into this, even by black people who believed that the Underground Railroad is what is, and the Marronage threatened the superstructure, including black people who want to just gain what is gained. And these Maroons were dangerous people. So Marronage in the United States, you go to Jamaica, every mountain, every cave is named after Maroons.
Right.
Louisiana, the Maroon activity is erased.
Right.
You have to crawl to caves and things when I was doing the research to find tits and bits here and there. So in the memory of black people in America, they have surgically removed by preoccupying them by the imposed white supremacist narrative of history.
Right.
In rebuttaling that itself undermined the fact that the biggest runaways all the way from Virginia, North Carolina, Dismal Swamp, where you're from, all the way to, from there, South Carolina, you go to Georgia. Georgia was even created as a state to stop runaway Maroons who are now, descending into Florida, waging guerrilla warfare. And so this enormous history, when I found it denied, and I just had to go into documentary film, which I've been doing. It's almost going to be finished in a year, I think.
Fantastic.
And that takes you all the way to, this history takes you all the way to, this whole landscape. But Florida is a crux, it's a turning point before even Oklahoma becomes to be discernible.
Right.
And then you have Texas and to Mexico. So the descendants, I traced them all, from folks who run away all the way from Mississippi. In the oral tradition of Black Seminoles, you find this this history kept without the black bourgeoisie's participation. I have found Maroon descendants have small libraries, dusty libraries with photographs that traces back so much history. Then I learned, after I got all the historians, John Hope Franklin, Apotheker, Angela, etc., once I got the history, I was unquenched, not finding the descendants. So I started traveling into these places, and I found descendants. Even if I just went to a cemetery, I went to 7 cemeteries in Oklahoma, I will find a name called May, Faye, Cudjoe. You'll find all the names that you have seen converge into this Florida guerrilla warfare.
Right.
And then you go to Brackettville, Texas, the same names are in the cemetery. So I found this descendants kept the library of their life without the sanction of the, without the Smithsonian, without United States Park Service. Black people were keeping tab. They will take their little kids and make the cemetery, take names and numbers and retrace from 1700 their ancestors. Then I go to Mexico, the same names reappear in the cemetery. And the descendants are there. They don't speak English, they speak Spanish, but they are the Maroons of the United States.
Right.
So basically, it's a continuum. When I finished Sankofa, I wanted to do a sequel, but I'm not a descendant of Bank America, so that was frozen holding here. But I knew I could do, saving my own money, I could do this shooting of this Marronage, because I felt if I did this whole elaborate historical landscape, future young people, novelists, poets, filmmakers could tap into this individual narrative, because I found descendants who we only knew in drawings.
Right.
For example, I don't know if you saw this Native Americans and then this African guy with a turban called Abraham meeting the United States government officials. He's the man there. This man had a city called Abraham Town in Florida, next to Angola, and so you have all this maroonage landscape, but repressed even by scholars, and making this history disappear in the educational system. It's coming better now, a little bit here and there, but it's really the most suppressed, censored history, because it contradicts Abraham Lincoln himself. And basically, I don't know if it answered you, but I went all over to tell you. For me, what I have 6 kids, I want them to know black people fought back. That is a very important psychological. And it's not that superficial dashiki fist raising. It's a serious, to me, black maroons terrorize black bourgeoisie class. And that's good. That historical marking is very important. And those people I interviewed speak about this.
Right. Fantastic.
Thank you.
So are you working on another film as well?
Yeah, because, as you get older, you make sure you do everything that you can, at least, even if you don't have the funds. I'm doing a film, again, a very long film on the Ethiopian occupation. This is one history, again, censored because Ethiopians, 1896, I made a film about that. Ethiopians defeated, they're the one African country, black people, who defeated a major European, 1896. And then they were reinvaded in much more sophisticated technological warfare. And they only were occupied for 5 years and then resorted into guerrilla warfare and defeated the Italians. But all this history has been snatched by the British, Ethiopian part, Ethiopian role, and the fact that my father, he thought the Second World War began in Ethiopia. He doesn't accept this. When Hitler hits Poland, this is where it begins. Italy was poison gas from the air, killing millions of Ethiopians in Ethiopia, but they were black people. Now, you'll find in Langston Hughes literature in that period, 1935, 36, 37, you find the African-American community very, very involved, which is another movie to do.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to stop asking questions and open it up to this eager and long-sitting audience to see if you all would like to engage with Professor Gerima.
He's in front of you.
Okay, cool.
I think she's bringing a mic to you.
Okay, cool.
Thank you. All right, good evening, everybody.
Okay, cool.
Professor Gerima, first of all, I want to say thank you. I was able to see this film 26 years ago in Norfolk, Virginia. So I missed you. I think you were there, but we didn't get a chance to talk to you. So thank you, because this film has been a part of me since then. I wanted to share one story, and I have 2 questions for you. One story, I was on a beach in Malibu last year, and I was just meditating and just chilling, and a bird came down next to me, but his shadow was in the same shape as Sankofa. And I was like, that's a sign for something. So I wanted to ask you 2 quick questions. One, you said about the suppression of history. Have you considered about the suppression of the native, what we call Native American, the true Native and indigenous people of the United States? Because, there's been a big rise in, oral history of most what we call black families in the United States who have roots, who great-grandmother, anybody has some relation to some tribe, and in my research, they literally just changed the name of those tribes to Negro to avoid, paying reparations because on stolen land. So I wonder, have you considered that, in I guess your work or anything like that? And also, as far as the film about, there was a book written, I think it was in 1845, called The Religious Instruction of the Negro. And as I watched your film, I think about the damage that has played out from, using religion as a tool of control and destruction, and it just it's beyond the Black community. So I wanted to thank you for highlighting that in the film as well. But more so about my real question is: have you considered the renaming of the true people of this country?
Well, it's when I get to from the outset, Black people and Native Americans were not these fantastic friends. The runaway Black people had no friends when they hit Florida. There was some who came from part of the as part of the Yamasee. Runaway Africans come from South Carolina to St. Augustine, Florida, this way. And there's that true united front that you notice early. And later on, you find when the Creek Nation was divided into two, within their own oppressive culture, one became a Maroon. One group became a Maroon, and the Indians called them Cimarrones, Seminoles. And they had to go to the forest to fight both the U.S. Army or the Spanish Army in the Native American Creek oppressive nation. So when you come to this forest, they found Africans already waging guerrilla warfare. In the United States, one of the things you have to know is scholars, even the United States government, for example, the 1980s is about runaway Black people. It has all kind of hoodoo names. But the crux of the matter is slavery. 1800, even Jefferson's idea of buying Louisiana, buying Florida, all the way to Mexico, has a lot to do with this runaway Africans waging intensive guerrilla warfare in these territories that are principal enemies of the English or the Americans, who are the Spanish. So Black people's history all the way to Mexico is untold history. I'm just doing a slice of it coming into the corridor of Texas into Nacimiento, Mexico, because I can't spread there. I mean, this is why I'm very, I'm sad that so many stupid Black filmmakers are engaged with booty call kind of movie with so much untold history under their nose. It frustrates me like hell. Some are my own students. So for me, it chokes you. The very history chokes you. We go to Oklahoma, we're in the middle of the contradiction of Indians refusing Africans, who are their family, from joining the tribe because of the money. Yeah. If you look at the Cherokees, just by the pressure of the Congress, took back Black people. Otherwise, they look and say, he looks Indian, no, he looks African, he expelled the African looking. So there's a whole fascism practiced in Oklahoma by Native Americans against Africans. So you can cover it as ever, politicians could do anything to it. You take your camera, you're in the middle of the contradiction. Indian folks calling Africans, you are my nigger, you are my slave, but you're not me, you're not my tribe. And there are people in the tribe also fighting to take back their family, include them, etc. Historically, this has been put by white American Indian agents by bringing money, by bringing liquor, by giving this, that side. And now the money of the gambling casino. Casino money and all this has brought more contradiction. When these people went through the trails of tears, even scholars would write from the first, second, third Seminole, those people evacuated once the treaty began, because the one folks who came all the way with their guns to Florida were black Seminoles. Everybody came disarmed. In the Cherokee family, black people were disarmed. But in terms of the black Seminoles, they landed in Oklahoma with their guns. This is historical fact, I'm telling you. And three treaties, 3 generations came. And historians will document so many Negroes. And then they say, the Seminole 25 or 45 or 400 and 200 Negroes or 400 of their slaves. They would call them their slaves. There wasn't no slavery. The Seminoles got the idea from this. The Creeks got the idea in their treaty all the way back with George Washington, saying they will catch you slave. They found it lucrative. So even in the reparation, sooner or later, Native Americans will be implicated. So the contradiction is too big. I'll only confuse you. But for me, I think the beautiful part of this united Native Americans and Africans in Florida, beautiful, united, fighting, and that the white American power structure inserts contradictory moves by recognizing and not recognizing. Now, the United States Congress refused. There were black people in the war. When the U.S. Army only documented, this is not an Indian war, this is an African war, Negro war, they would call it. U.S. Congress people could not be funded if they don't call it an Indian war. So this alone is a whole book. But the scholarship, the statistics that white historians were writing was so biased. They will take, and the black people, when they arrive in Oklahoma, you don't have the same accounting. Black people have disappeared. What happened to them? And then in Oklahoma, then John Horse, who was the second chief after Abraham. Abraham is in Oklahoma already. John Horse is now saying, we didn't come to be enslaved again. Would not disarm. And that's how they run and escape again through Texas into Mexico. And the descendants have this history tapped. So for me, I think the sensible Native American elite and sensible African American elites, they need to confront, not romantically, this serious matter, because it kept exploding. Now, even if you look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, you cannot look at Tulsa, Oklahoma without maroonage. Who settled there? Where did they come from? They come from 32 towns settled in Oklahoma. And in most cases, black people hit oil. Well, why did you ask? My brother, why did you ask me? You should be talking about it. I'm just studying it from situations.
We have another question.
Yes, up here. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming out. Hi, right here. Thank you so much for coming out. My friend and I, we're actually graduate film students at the UCLA directing program, and so it's been right here.
My sister.
Yeah. It's been a real treat for us.
Somebody in front of you is covering you.
It's all right.
Okay.
I
see you. Okay.
Okay, cool. Well, it's been a real treat to hear you and see you and hear you talk. And it's funny that you mentioned St. Augustine, because I'm actually from there, like born and raised, and a lot of the history that you're speaking about, I didn't really come into it until, just very recently when I was volunteering at basically the only African American museum that's within the city, because a lot of that history is not spoken of in our local curriculum. But back to this discussion, I think my main question was, in the film, you choose to, there's a very much a strong focus on centering black women in the struggles that they go through in terms of, just the violence that's enacted upon them, the different difficulties they have to face and whatnot. And so I'm curious, because the film seems to take a narrative where the black women, especially Shola, she goes from kind of being victimized to kind of being her own savior in the end. And I'm just curious as to, was that intentional when you originally planned that film for you kind of like plan for like Shola's journey, for example, to be that she goes from a situation that's very difficult, obviously, but then in the end she grows in her arc, and she grows into her arc, and then she just kind of saves herself. I was wondering if you were conscious of that approach when you originally planned the film.
Well, my sister, when I first started writing the script, as a foreign student, I couldn't work. So at UCLA, I just decided to do a script one summer, and I was just stationed myself on the fourth floor of the, UCLA library. That time, the whole section was on slavery, because I was very much, I wanted to know this contradiction, just for my own self. Really, some people, I was very proud that black people embraced me the day it came out. But if I didn't do that movie, there's some things that have possessed me, literally diverted me. And it was black people in America, because they were the ones who hugged me, embraced me, and said, when in fact, one brother, when he called me brother, saying, no, you're not my brother, And it's only black people in America who shoot that word. And then I said, learn something. You have a problem. Why is he saying he's your brother and you don't know how to embrace it again? So I've learned a lot. So don't look at it as like, all my movies are just the staircases of my own evolution in terms of my reactionary self. But deep down, I don't like the story of victims. I don't like, for example, white violence on black people to be a movie-making venture. Because to me, I want to know why she, the white woman or the white man, is violent towards this person. And I always say, what did you do to make him be violent? I don't want saint black people. They must have done something, is my assumption. And that is freedom, not accepting the very idea of slavery itself, the word slave. Black people, human beings cannot accept that word. Right. That itself begins a problem. Right. So if you look at, not women, or in my characters are all not victims, but trying to make their own historical planet on a mission. And so for me, even when she is, she's having a relationship away from the main house, the plantation owner's house, with a dangerous man like Shango. That itself shows you who she is. So she's not a sudden, transformation, which I don't like Hollywood movies, because suddenly I like this kind of evolutionary growth. By the time she crosses the river with him, for me, it's gradual evolution. So basically, I think, black people, if you try to make them saints, you miss the point. But like any human being, they'll fight back, is a very important information. And also the history making. Black kids are made, not their nature, but they're made and conditioned to be passive spectators of the construction of history by white people or white supremacy. That's bad for both races. Black kids' capacity to be history makers should be important to me as a storyteller. So when I tell a story, I want people who construct historical circumstances out of where they find themselves in. And so if you saw my first script I wrote, I always tell black people, you would have stoned me if you saw the script, because I was literally taking stereotype information from history without critically subjecting it to a digestive system of thinking, because the books are full of information that denied the basic humanity of black people. They were at the mercy of something bigger than themselves. No. The history of America tells you this undermined history, that black people's history is undermined, but America is America because of black people's role in America. And many people would not know. A lot of immigrants from Africa don't understand like I didn't understand in the beginning. A lot of, movements do not know. In fact, one descendant, Maroon, said his father told him, we've gone through so much for everybody. Just live, just be happy. Mm-hmm. And that tells you, if you look at the role of black people in in cleansing America from its sinful history, you would have a different, you just find it's a miracle black people are walking on this earth in America. Brazil too is just, the same, but I'm concentrating here. So for me, I think when you develop a character as a film student, it's very important not to bring in, because he is this, he wouldn't do this. You just have to work on the multidimensional humanity of the character as he or she comes into a relationship with other people and transforming. Never static, never, we have to stop mythologizing black characters, because when you mythologize a black character in popular culture, you undermine the capacity of black kids to be history makers. Because, when you make everybody like Tarzan and John Wayne, John Wayne, he never runs out of bullets, he always kills 10,000 Indians, etc. That is a superman. And black people imitate super white people's story, but it undermines the capacity. A black kid has to say, oh, she did this, she stutters like me, she has a background like me, she didn't go to school like me, etc., whatever, but she was a history maker. So when you make a story, the story cannot disenfranchise black kids from becoming history makers. All we do now, especially now, is we make them spectators of a very active white American culture. It's the same thing with Latinos, Chicanos, same thing with Native Americans, decapitated from their own capacity because they're not, their story got derailed by the superimposed story. So it's very important as film people, that you understand that black kids' capacity to be history maker has to be in the forefront of your interest in a story. Otherwise, it debilitates. For me, you can take Superfly when it came out, The black kids run to him in his fancy car, everything, and he says, "Don't be like me." That's not, the kids are looking at the car saying, they're not even hearing the dialogue. So a lot of black folks in our movies, we think dialogue changes. We even argue, say, but she said this. I don't care what she did. What did she do? In film, it's the action that is very, very important. What did she do? Words have many texts in it. It depends on, so many meanings. And I don't want to see you. I don't want to see you. I don't want to see you. It changes. One sentence could mean so much. So for me, dialogue is not engaging, doing things we see, and we want to be, we see, we realize our capacity. To me, that's what I need. That's why my children, when I tell my kids they cannot be victims of, in their relationship, daily relationship of dating, I don't want them to be victims under a bully boy who didn't go through the rites of passage to be a man. And this is very, very important. I don't know if I addressed your questions.
Well, our program comes to an end at 10:30, and it is 10:30, and I want to thank all of you all for coming. I think there's no one who will leave this room.
That guy has a mic, has been holding.
Okay, let me just say this, and then we'll have the question. No one's going to leave this room thinking that this was not a good way to spend your time this evening. We have one last question.
My name is Dr. Jill Humphreys, and I just spent the last year as a visiting scholar teaching at Bahar Dar University and Arbor Minch University in Ethiopia. And so first of all, I want to say I grew up on your films. And I will say this, I really appreciate your candor about us as African Americans and Africans not mythologizing the realities of our lived experiences. And so I go back and forth when I do my speaking engagements here now about my real experiences as a black woman teaching in Ethiopia and having having been traumatized as a woman, because I was thought that I was an Ethiopian woman, and therefore I experienced the street level harassment, and I experienced being the only black female in the college with a PhD and the realities. And so, so I just want to say, I want to thank you that I actually heard you validate that I should be honest and speak my truth, which I will now do. The other question that I have for you, though, is, so Colonel John Robinson, who I'm sure you know, was the African-American who Emperor Haile Selassie asked to come and found Ethiopian Airlines. And I was blessed to have the opportunity to go visit the aviation center at Ethiopian Airlines and take photos of the bust and given a tour. But my question to you is, actually having worked with your young people in Ethiopia, who I love, they are the hope for me for Ethiopia, your young people. I just want to say that. My question is, I saw them experience the flip side of what I see my black American children here do, and that is they've internalized an external view of themselves. So in conversations that I had with them, and they immediately said things like, we're in a developing country, and then therefore that's why blah, 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 right? And my comment to them was, or observation was, there may be aspects of your country that are developing, but you are a 3,000-year-old civilization that gave so much to the world, right? And then I also showed them their connection to the wider black diaspora, because I'm one of few black Americans that participate in the US's Fulbright program. So I'm on a mission here to talk to my young black folk and my faculty, black other peers, that we need to take advantage of this. But my question is, are you thinking about doing a film or encouraging some of your students to do a film on this sort of black, what I call transatlantic movement of people, specifically in the context of Ethiopia, because the folk that I interacted with really know little to nothing about African Americans. Matter of fact, individuals with the Ethiopian diaspora that I worked with said, Jill, you saying that you're a Pan-African goes on deaf ears, because that generation is my generation and we're in exile. Right? And that the people you're interacting with now have no conception, right, except what they see of black Americans on the big screen or being basketballers. So I would really like to see someone like you perhaps do that kind of film, or your students.
Well, let me just say this to you. Ethiopia factors out in the African American landscape in a very strong way. The problem is modern Ethiopia does not represent past Ethiopia. We have now, as I told you myself in the beginning, I was miseducated. In fact, a Caribbean sister who was a cleaning sister at Goodman School of Drama in Chicago was shocked I came to study drama in America. She was busting me, because she said, how dare you, born in the Nile Valley, come here to study theater from, at least if you came to study something else, science, okay, to study theater from people who you were the original people. So the point is this: in the Dismal Swamp, when the British went in, as they were fighting the independent movement of the George Washingtons, they went into the Dismal Swamp to create because in the Dismal Swamp, black people were there for over 100 years. Until the Civil War, they never came out. And waging guerrilla warfare in the vicinities. Max Roach is a descendant of these people. I can trace you, Paul Robeson. This maroon history is no joke. Now you go, when the British came, a general came to make a united front proposal to them, abolishing slavery, their requirements. And then he asked them, what should I call you folks? He said, call us Ethiopian legionnaires. And this is like shock to me. So Ethiopia, in black churches in Mississippi, Alabama, you go to black churches, Ethiopia is always mentioned. But the contemporary modern Ethiopia, who's been bamboozled by the American empire, are a disappointment to African Americans. This you have to face. it's a struggle that I have with my own community in Washington, D.C. Now, there was a brother from San Antonio, Texas. Very important story. I wanted to do a documentary film because he was the first African American who came to Ethiopia during Menelik after the Adwa battle, and met the king and created the American-Ethiopian diplomatic relationship began with him. His story is amazing. I don't want to go into it. There's no time. But, when you want to do a film that extricate the monopoly of white narrative logic, there are stories that cannot stay in bed with a white supremacist paradigm or aesthetic narrative logic. This is why we go see a movie, and we're going to see Black Tarzan soon, because black people look like they have no imagination. We're going to see everything white people have done, we have to do. That's one kind of thing. Fine. But the innovative black mind, the imaginative black mind, those stories will blow your mind. I mean, Sankofa is very imperfect in narrative. I have a lot of, when I first came out in Chicago, I almost got beat up, but saying my film is imperfect. Black people don't want to accept, because it was in a desert, Sankofa came, and everybody lost their center of gravity. But it's a film I'm proud of, but with so much imperfection. And the tragedy is that to develop my narrative accent, there's no room for black people. You don't see the LA Rebellion folks like Charles Burnett, et cetera, Larry Clark. You don't see them arrive. We see their giant movies that every white American, New York Times and everybody go crazy over. Charlie's film, et cetera, Larry Clark passing through. But what happens is we don't even have the opportunity to grow and arrive to really go where we want to go since Bush Mama. I have no financial right, economic right, to determine what movie to make, except like the ones I'm doing now that nobody seems to care to finance. So you have to know one thing. Black people, young black people should know they will be out of, cherry picking, or a boy with the golden shoes will be outmoded. Even to white Americans, the industry is very precarious and brutal and cruel. So to me, the alternative, independent, low-budget way of expressing ourselves has not taken in. When I talk to my students, I don't care how much you admire me. You got to show me alternative narrative journey you're making. My life should be an example of an imperfect filmmaker. Pick it up where I left it. And so I wish, the brother pilot, I wish I could do a movie on that. But I'll tell you, unless black people with the right mind, just being black is not enough for me. I've seen many dog relationships in black people. So for me, unless a liberated mindset who says this story, for me, I always tell my friends, my story don't make money, I know. But, for me, it's a very important variety to have around. Just go there, come see. When I met a kid in prison, in Cincinnati Federal Prison, I showed my film to prisoners. They were the best professors of film analysis. I'm telling you, brilliant black people. And one guy kept rising his ears, kept crying, and he says, I was in Chicago where this movie came out, and I peeped in, and then I walked back to Fresh. I was watching Fresh. Fresh was moving with me where I was, but this film was not moving fast with me. But now I sit here facing what I'm facing. This movie, you guys don't know, it's talking to me, and he started crying. And the thing about it is, when you are in fast mode, my kind of narrative makes no sense. I don't like fast-paced. You have to have your own narrative logic paced. But this whole skating narrative movement is destroying. So how do we make these stories to be not, to me, I'm scared to see Harriet Tubman. I saw in the plane, she had this giant hat running. I said, oh shit, she got shot right there. Because I don't know the runaways who have this fabulous fashion. And so I'm like that with this, I'm not moving with this fashion show generation. The rebellion was so harsh. When if John Hope Franklin, people tell you, the Maroons' history could not be written because they were acting the history themselves and they didn't take note. They didn't have a minute to take note. It was the harshest life they were leading. So I'm like out of sync with this kind of, the idea. For me, costume doesn't even come to me. I can take curtain and make a costume for Nunu. That's how I did it. I don't want this elaborate move like how white folks did in Hollywood does not apply to me. In fact, the people I employ, they try to do like Roots kind of costume. I dismissed every shit, threw it away, and I said, this is how it's going to go. I sat there, the sister with a stick saying, you're going to do it now like this in picture because this black painter left us how they look. Now cut me some clothes. Simple. Boop, 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 boop. It was a costume. Now cut me two in case this one goes bad. So as far as I'm concerned, this fashion show mentality, it is Hollywoodian of our story. Fine for entertainment, to go out with boyfriend, girlfriend, fine, to do this, fine. But in the end, our history, where the battleground is, I was telling my sister, every contradiction in the world is because of stories. Whose story are we killing on? Are we fighting? Whose story is making us go shopping? Everything we do, whose story are we implementing physically? In that kind of contradiction, black people need to take, some of our young people need to be doing, in case this don't work, do this too.
Thank you. Well, I think that we all want to give Professor Gerima a wonderful round of applause. Okay.
Thank you.